talk to us about the inspiration and intention of writing your book, My Soul is Filled with Joy.
Well, my original intention was certainly to document my in-laws, Sam and Esther Goldberg, their story of what happened to them. That was my original intention. But for me personally, it changed and it bloomed and blossomed into their story really becoming my story. So the book, there's part one, which is Sam and Esther's story. And I start from before the war because I want to give some background to what their lives were like before their whole world was upended in World War II. But then I take the reader through their lives until they meet each other. And then as they go on together through life, and I end their part of the story when they emigrate to America in 1949. The second part of the story is my story and the story of my deciding to write this book, which is a crazy thing. Like, I'm writing a book about my in-laws' experience, and it's not my blood family. It's a family that I married into, and kind of how that came to be. And then all the things, the miraculous and amazing experiences that I had as I was on this journey that changed my life forever. That's really what happened. My intention was to write their story, but it became, for me personally, it became so much more and so much bigger than that.
Talk to me for a moment a bit more about that, Karen. How did your life change? In what ways?
Just a tiny bit of background about me. I grew up here in Seattle, lived a really lovely childhood, 2 wonderful, loving parents, 2 brothers, grandparents, and cousins, and just lived a regular, comfortable middle-class life. And my father was an attorney. So we just lived here, and I had a very privileged, lovely childhood. I went to private college at Barnard College. And then I went to, as I said, I went and worked for a senator, and then I went to law school. Like my life's just been lovely, really, absolutely lovely. So my in-laws, like I mentioned before, my father-in-law was a prisoner in the death camp Treblinka from June of 1942 until August of 1943. So 13 months. Most people that came to Treblinka came off the train, and they were dead in 90 minutes. And he survived for 13 months. So it's remarkable, his survival there. My mother-in-law, in the meantime, they didn't know each other at this time. There was a roundup in her town, which is not very far from Treblinka, maybe like 15 miles away. But there was a roundup of all the Jews in the town, and she hid in an attic to escape. And she survived the roundup. She came out after the town was all gone, basically, and quiet. And she ran out into the forest, and she tried to find some people who would help her, some non-Jewish families that might give her some food or a place to hide. And she was turned away over and over again. But then finally, this one house that she knocked on the door, the Stish family, she said, "Can you help me? I'm starving, haven't eaten in 3 days, and I need to hide." And they said, "Yes, we will help you." And she hid in and around the Stish family farms. There were two families that lived next door to each other. And she was hiding there for a year when some of the prisoners at the Treblinka death camp, which was just, like I said, 10, 15 miles away, made an uprising. And my father-in-law was part of the planning and execution of that uprising. And they blew up the camp, and they all tried to run away. There were about 800 prisoners who were the workforce of the camp, 800 Jews who they kept as prisoners there. And so he started running. My father-in-law ran out of the camp, and he ran and he ran and he ran. And he ended up in this forest. This area was totally wooded of trees. And that's the area that my mother-in-law had been hiding in. And that's where they met. She saw him. They knew right away that each other were Jewish people. They started speaking in Yiddish, which was their native language. The Jews of Poland, almost all of them spoke Yiddish. And he said, "I just escaped from Treblinka. Can you help me? I need to hide. They're chasing the Nazis, and the Ukrainians are not far behind. We need to hide." She couldn't believe it. Somebody escaped from Treblinka. But she said, "Okay, come with me." And she took him to who she called her angels, the Stish families. And they knocked on the door there and said, "This man just escaped from Treblinka. You have to hide us. They're out chasing after all the Jews who escaped." And this woman, rightly so, looked at her, Helena, and she said, "You're crazy. You're nuts. I can't hide you. If they find you hiding in my barn, they're going to kill you guys for sure. And they're going to kill me and all my children." And that was absolutely true. But somehow Esther convinced her to hide in the barn, allow them to hide in the barn. So they hid in the barn for like 3 days until the big search kind of calmed down. And then they came out, and Sam decided to stay and hide with Esther. because he had nowhere to go. He knew that his family was dead already, so he didn't have anywhere to go. Esther knew her whole family was already murdered. So they hid together and they went out and deeper into the forest and they dug a pit and they lived in that pit. If you want to call it living, they lived in that pit for almost a whole year. They covered it with wooden planks and brush from the forest floor, so it would be like camouflaged. And the Stish family brought them food almost every day, every day that it was safe to bring food, they brought them food and kind of left it there, and they would get it after dark. They would only come out usually after dark. And then they were liberated by the Soviet army that came through Poland in the summer of 1944. So they lived in that pit for about a year. And when we went and visited, so I was able to locate the surviving children of these Stish families through my research. And my whole family went and visited them. And they said to us as we were talking, when we're done talking here, if you want, we'll take you out to the forest and show you the pit that your parents lived in. How is it possible that the pit from 75 years ago is still there? And they said, oh, it's still there. So they showed us the pit. They walked us out into the forest and showed us. I was there with my husband and our 4 kids and 1 son-in-law. And they showed us, it's deteriorated. It's eroded, it's full of leaves, but it's definitely a pit. And it was when I was staring into that pit that I changed forever. And I realized that I have taken my life for granted and what I have, the easy life that I have lived, for granted. I knew that when I would go back home to Seattle, I'd go to my nice house with a refrigerator full of food and a closet full of clothes. And my in-laws had nothing like that. They lived here in this dirt. And that was the moment where I decided to live my life more aware of the goodness, trying to live with more gratitude.